Good afternoon, everyone. This is Mike O'Malley here with the Hurricane Outlook and discussion for May 17th, 2020, recorded around 4:40 p.m. Eastern Time. While Tropical Storm Arthur still remains a tropical storm at this time with maximum sustained winds of 45 miles per hour at about a pressure of about 1,002 millibars, moving off towards the north-northeast here at about 9 miles per hour. This is expected to bring some tropical storm conditions potentially for portions of the North Carolina Outer Banks, and for that region, a tropical storm warning has been issued for those areas. One of the main key things is that the storm is not really expected to strengthen much. There is a little bit of change here that this is only expected to come really anywhere between 50 and 60 miles per hour. Again, not much in the change of that, but we will likely see these numbers actually come down, and I'll get to the reasoning behind that here in just a little bit. But again, tropical storm warnings remain up for portions of the North Carolina Outer Banks just north of Wilmington, North Carolina. And the outer bands of Arthur are already starting to impact portions of the North Carolina coastline, and even as far into portions like Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, all the way down through almost near Moncks Corner, Georgetown, just to the north and east of Charleston. Again, this is going to be one of those things where as this system comes up, we're going to be able to see it pretty well on radar, depending on how close this actually passes. Again, there could be some convective elements bringing some squally conditions to portions of the North Carolina Outer Banks and even far northern South Carolina tonight, that there could be some squally conditions as it generally moves off towards the north-northeast here and it eventually curves away from the United States at this time. That's the general thinking behind it. Again, this is expected to remain a modest tropical storm with some strengthening gradually possible over the next 24 to 36 hours or so. Now, if you take a look here at the satellite, this is from COD Meteorology, you are seeing that there is some spiral banding to the north of this, but that's really about it. There's almost no convection over the center of circulation at this time, and there is a little bit of convection, but not really a lot to sustain anything. There's a ton of dry air across this region that's really hindering really any significant development of the system, with a very dry air actually out towards the west of the system being entrained in. And you can see that here in the low-level cloud fields here, is that there's really no cumulus across this area. There's basically no cumulus across this area. There's only cumulus here in the middle of our low pressure here, and some cumulus generally off towards the east of the system, but generally this remains a lopsided system. Mainly the convection is all to the east and north of this system, but generally there's nothing surrounding the center, and that should actually promote some weakening if that continues here over the next couple of hours. Again, we will have another reconnaissance plane that will go in there later tonight and investigate what's going on here with Tropical Storm Arthur, but not really all that impressed with it. What is good is the vorticity field. This is the 850 millibar vorticity, and the higher up you go in this contour, the higher cyclonic spin you're getting in the atmosphere. And you do notice that where our system is, there's fairly good cyclonic shear, and it's fairly well bundled, but there is still a lot of stretching going on here. It's certainly not anything as stretched out as this over here. This is some upper level vorticity over here that's not rooted at any surface. But there is a lot of surface turning here, a lot of vorticity that's actually bundled and concentrated at the surface. And it is still a tropical storm with sustained winds of about 40 to 45 miles per hour. But again, that's really the extent of it. Now, the wind shear across this region remains light right now, but some wind shear is expected to increase. And you can see that coming up to the North Carolina coastline here. There is some wind shear that is expected to increase over the coming days here, really because of this troughing of low pressure here that you can see right now is carving an area of wind shear just across into the north of the system. As this begins to dig in and really set in across the area, this wind shear is expected to pretty much come straight across Tropical Storm Arthur here, and that should diminish some of the potential for strengthening over the next 48 or 36 to 48 hours or so. Now, if you take a look here at the IR satellite, this is also from Central University of Wisconsin Madison website here. And again, you notice all of this drier air, and we'll actually switch it to a better IR loop or IR satellite here. notice all of this drier, more stable air off the continental United States here, and that is what's getting actually entrained into Tropical Storm Arthur at this point in time. Again, there is some convective outflow band just to the north where some rain is actually coming into play. And we actually have this storm right now situated in fairly marginal sea surface temperatures. As this begins to head north over the next 12 to 24 hours, this should encounter the Gulf Stream, and the upper ocean heat content values are actually going to be a little bit higher across this area. So this should ride in a little bit more of a favorable environment for strengthening over the next 12 to 24 hours. And for that reason, the National Hurricane Center still does call for some gradual strengthening up to a modest to strong tropical storm here within the next 36 hours or so. But again, this is going to start to lose its tropical characteristics as this approaches the North Carolina Outer Banks here, because there's going to be now baroclinic forces that are going to be acting upon this system to maintain and then eventually intensify the system to be about 60 miles per hour and hold its intensity for a little while before this finally becomes subtropical fully and moves somewhere in the vicinity just to the north of Bermuda. So again, interest in Bermuda may have to start watching and paying attention to this, as maybe you might get some heavier rain and any bands of precipitation that come through there. But again, it does not look like that this will be any direct impact, but again, interest in Bermuda will certainly have to pay attention to that. Again, this is still a fairly large storm, and for that reason, even though it is probably expected to stay mostly away from the coastline and never make landfall, this will be close enough that it will bring some impacts to the North Carolina Outer Banks, and for that reason, there is tropical storm warnings that are in effect for that area. Again, if you go back to the visible satellite here, you do notice that there's a lot of dry air around this area, and that's going to really limit a lot of the convective development across this area. So there's not going to really be a lot for this to really get into here. And just taking a real quick here, looking at the intensity maximum, the actual intensity for the maximum expected areas. If we can just forecast that up real quick, there we go. Really there's not a lot of significant strengthening that's likely across this area, even though that this says that this could theoretically support a strong Category 3 hurricane. Again, this is going to remain at a fairly good brisk pace off towards the north-northeast here, and eventually moving off towards the north and east here over the coming days. So again, not much strengthening is likely across this area, and only modest strengthening is likely at this current time. So certainly not seeing anything that would generally support otherwise a stronger tropical system. Now, if we take a look here at the tracks, it's the 18Z model guidance from tropicaltidbits.com. Again, you do notice now that only two models, the HORF model and the GFS, actually have this now making landfall. Most other models are generally up and away from the United States coastline here, eventually bending back towards Bermuda. Again, interest in Bermuda, do need to be paying attention for some possible impacts later in the week coming up here. But again, our main focus right now is for the next 12 to 24 hours across portions of the North Carolina Outer Banks. Some general squally conditions are possible, but depending on how close this might get to portions of the Carolina coast, this might bring more or less impacts. Again, there is still some wiggle room here for it to be generally along and just to the east of the actual track, or along and just to the west of the actual track, according to the HWRF model. Now, again, taking a look here at the intensity guidances, we're really only looking out to about 48 hours, which is denoted by that line there that I just drew. Again, we're really only looking for about 48 hours because of the fact that this is beginning to undergo extratropical transition at that point in time. Again, for the most part, we are still going to be seeing some modest strengthening, but just how much is going to be the real question here. Again, most models suggest that within the next 12 hours, this will find the Gulf Stream and will begin to strengthen modestly. Again, but currently, so far, given the limitations and given the sprawling nature of this system, this is likely to be slow at organizing over the next couple of days. And there is going to be only a brief window for portions of intensification once this finds the Gulf Stream really across this region. But again, for the most part, only modest strengthening is possible. But for right now, we are still watching the potential for some rain bands to move ashore currently. Taking a real quick look at the HWRF model, this is the, we'll just kind of zoom in here and take a closer look. This is the 12Z model guidance here, coming off of tropicaltidbits.com. And you do notice here that we'll just move that out to about 9 hours, or about 0Z tonight. This is about 1,003 millibars, so this is still a fairly weak system at this point. Again, the moisture fields really aren't all that impressive, and you do notice all of this drier air that's still getting wrapped around and entrained into the system. But if we do move this out to about another 18 hours by 6Z or 1 o'clock Monday morning, we do notice that this starts to deepen and intensify as this approaches the North Carolina Outer Banks. Again, this is a little bit of a quicker model here, but again, for the most part, this does suggest that this drier air still will be entrained into this system, and by this time, and if we take a look here at the radar, this will be undergoing some extratropical transition as that trough to the north starts to approach and acts as a baroclinic zone, forcing really across Tropical Storm Arthur, and that's really going to prevent any significant tropical strengthening. But the H-Wharf does get this down about 997 to 994 millibars as it's impacting portions of the North Carolina Outer Banks. Again, just how close this really gets is going to depend. The H-Wharf wants to dump a lot of rain across this region and across portions of the Outer Banks in North Carolina, but depending on the track, it might have a very substantial turn of events for portions of the North Carolina Outer Banks. Again, there is still a lot here that is up for grabs, but again, for the most part, that most of the models now are suggesting that this will come very close to North Carolina Outer Banks within the next 12 to 24 hours and eventually move away from the United States, with only 2 models now suggesting it actually coming back to the coastline. So again, for the most part, we're going to continue to monitor the track of the system. Again, if you want to follow me for more frequent updates, you can check out my Twitter, which I will link in the description down below here, and make sure to follow me on there. And again, we are still watching Tropical Storm Arthur right now, winds of 45 miles per hour, tropical storm warnings up for portions of the North Carolina Outer Banks. I'll have another full video forecast update by tomorrow morning. Other than that, I will keep doing some brief updates on Twitter. Hope you all have a good evening and stay safe, everyone, and I'll see you back here tomorrow morning.